Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. It's Laura for the WOW Embossing channel, and I have a really fun technique to share with you using your embossing pen with your stamped images to colour them with your embossing powders. So this is a great way of using your embossing powders. I'm going to be using this Smiling Bloom stamp set from Gina Designs today, and if you haven't seen an embossing pen before, this is the one from WOW, and it's got like a bullet nib. So hopefully the camera will just zoom in on it there. So you can just see it's just like a little pen. And we're going to be able to use that to colour our stamped images. Now, I've got a selection of embossing powders out. And these are all translucent powders that I've got in my stash. And you know they're translucent because they've got that little symbol of a T in brackets there on the front. So you can do this with your opaque embossing powders, but if you really want to still be able to see the line detail of the stamped image, then I'd recommend using translucent powders. So I'm going to take that large floral spray from our stamp set and I'm just going to attach it to a clear acrylic block. And then I'm going to ink it up with some VersaFine Clair Nocturne Black ink. Now you could definitely experiment here. You could use a different colour of ink, or you could stamp it in WOW Embossing ink and then heat emboss it in gold or silver, and that would create a really fun effect as well. But I'm just going to stamp it in some black ink, and I've got some WOW Superior Smooth White cardstock, and I'm just making sure that I've got some nice even pressure over the stamped image. And because the cardstock is really smooth, you do need to be careful that you don't slip your stamp. So as you can see, I did get a little bit of a slip there, so I'm just going to flip the card over and re-stamp it. You could definitely use a stamp positioning tool if you prefer. I love using my acrylic blocks though. I just find them really convenient, and I tend to end up with a really cluttered desk, and my stamping platform just takes up a bit more space. So I guess I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to using my stamping platform, but wow, you live and learn and you end up stamping twice. So use whatever you prefer. So once the stamped image is done, I'm then going to stamp this other longer floral spray from the stamp set. I end up not using this in today's card, but I'm going to show you the process much the same way as the other one, just so that you can get an idea of how you can use your embossing pen to colour these images in. So again, I'm just going to stamp that on some Superior White Smooth cardstock from WOW. And because I've stamped in pigment ink, it is going to take a few moments to dry. So to avoid smudging it, I am just going to lightly heat set it with my heat tool. And then I do just go over it with an anti-static powder bag, again, just to take any moisture or residue off from my fingers where I've touched the cardstock. That isn't necessary, and you'll see that my ink wasn't quite dry in the top left. So another reason to just make sure that you set that ink. So now I'm going to come in with my embossing pen. So all I'm doing is adding some of the WOW ink to the centres of the flowers, and then I'm going to add my first embossing powder, which is going to be the Funky Fossil Blackberry translucent embossing powder. Now with the embossing powder, because we've only added embossing ink to the centres of the flowers, it's only going to stick to those areas. However, if your pigment ink isn't quite dry, then the powder is going to stick to those areas as well. So be mindful of that, because if you're using opaque powders and it sticks to the lines, then obviously those lines are then going to take on that powder. We're using translucent powders, so when the colour sticks to the black lines and it's heat set, you're not going to see it. It's just going to blend into the black. So just bear that in mind with your powders. Now when I'm colouring in the petals, I'm not going for full coverage. Of course you can do if that's what you'd like, but I actually really like leaving a little bit of white space. And I'm not being precious about where that white space is. I'm just adding some embossing ink to the petals and using a flicking motion like you would with an alcohol marker, just to kind of give it that rustic coloured effect. So with the camera, it's not picking up where that embossing ink is. In real life, you can see roughly where the ink has gone. So it does help when you're doing it in real life. You will be able to get a rough idea of where the pen is going. But yeah, don't be too precious about it. Of course, if you want a solid coloured image, then go ahead and make sure that you've coloured all the bits. And remember, if you have missed anywhere, we can always come back in with the embossing pen again, add some more embossing powder and reheat set it. So try not to worry too much when you're doing this technique. So obviously I used Blackberry for the centres of the flowers. I've used Lavender Fields embossing powder for the flowers themselves. And then for the leaves, I'm going to use Emerald City, which is a beautiful embossing glitter inspired by Marion Emberson. And it's a really nice green colour. And it goes really nicely with the purple colours that we've used today. So I'm then going to make sure that my heat tool is nice and hot on the hottest setting. And I'm just going to heat set those powders from underneath. I don't want the glitter or any of the powders blowing off. So it's always good practice to heat set your embossing powders from underneath. And then once it's all heat set, if you do spot any areas that you've missed, like I've missed the stem and the couple of leaves to the smaller flowers, you can then just come back in with the embossing pen, add some more embossing powder and heat set again from underneath. So that is a great way of adding colour to your stamped images, using your embossing powders, and I just really love the effect that this gives. So you can see all that lovely shine and sparkle there. I'm going to just quickly speed through the colouring of the other stem just to show you again the same kind of technique, how to do it. I don't end up using this in today's card, but I just wanted to show you the technique again, and obviously using a slightly different shaped image. And I decide on this one to colour all the leaves first of all, and then I heat set those from underneath. And again, I've used the Emerald City on this. And then for the petals, I'm coming back in with the embossing pen and I'm just colouring all the outside petals of the flowers, and then I'm adding the Blackberry embossing powder. So just remember that the embossing powder is only going to stick where the embossing ink is. So that's why you're able to come in, use one colour, tap it off, come back in with another colour. As I'm doing here, I'm using a primary pink robin for the centres of the flowers. And so the embossing powders are not going to mix, and it's just a great way of adding all that colour and then heat setting it in one go if you want to. So that's that lovely little floral spray, but I'll pop that to one side. Now I have got the coordinating dies for this stamp set, and so I'm going to use those to cut the images out. So they're really nice and easy to line up with the stamped images, and I'm just going to run those through my die cutting machine. Once they're all die cut, we can then go ahead and put the card together, and I'm going to be making a 5x7 card today. I've got a matte layer of 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 in a purple coloured cardstock, and then a white layer that is 4 1/8 by 6 1/8. And I've just ran that through a Gina K Designs Lattice embossing folder, and then I'm just going to glue that down to that matte layer that we've created. And then that will sit really nicely on the front of that card. So before we go ahead and stick anything down, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiments. So I'm going to stamp that on the nested circle die on the white cardstock, and I'm going to use one of the sentiments from the stamp set which says "sending smiles across the miles." So I think this is a really lovely sentiment. I can then just stick that sentiment layer down to that purple matte layer that we've already created using some dies that I had in my stash. And then we can start arranging the card together. And I am going to add a little bit of foam tape just so that we've got some dimension. So first of all, I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of the main panel. And this just pops it up from the white card base. And I think adding a little bit of dimension just really steps a card up a little bit. So it is one of my favourite things to do. If you struggle at lining your layers up, then you could always add a little bit of liquid glue to the foam tape before you stick it down, and then that way you'll be able to just quickly move it before the glue sets. So that's a good little trick if you struggle to line things up. I've added some foam tape to the sentiment panel as well and stuck that down, and then for the floral sprays I've added foam tape to the back of those, but because the sentiment in the middle is on some foam tape as well, I do double up the foam tape just so that the flowers hang nicely over the top of the layers that we've created. So don't be afraid to double up your foam tape if you need to. It's a great little way of adding extra dimension as well. So once we've stuck those down, I'm going to add a few little clear dewdrops just to finish off the card. I'm just sticking these down with some Nuvo Deluxe glue, and then that is the finished card for today. So thank you so much for joining me here on the WOW Embossing channel. I really hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope it's given you some inspiration of ways that you can use your coloured embossing powders to colour in your stamped images. As always, don't forget to check out the links in the description box below for the products that have been used today. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button as well if you've enjoyed this video. And if you're not subscribed to the WOW Embossing channel already, then please consider subscribing for lots more inspiration and ways that you can use your embossing powders and more. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.